Hi, hello everybody. Thank you for watching. My name is Mariel Ingram and I'm with the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems at UW-Madison. I'm going to share my screen here, kick off my presentation. So I want to talk to you today about some work that I've done on environmental art science collaboration, work that's coming out in a book in this spring with Temple University Press, shameless plug. I want to read to you from the first part of the book a little bit on this concept of the orphaning of space, and then give you some example of the art science collaboration and the kind of possibilities for participation and new ways of thinking about dwelling on Earth. John and I decided we'd chance making it across the marsh with somewhat dry feet. We'd been zigzagging our way through a scrubby woods, bypassing people's encampments, empty now in the colder weather, and walking over low hills, bulldozed piles of soft, soggy dirt. We ducked under low, spreading branches of magnificent oaks, beribboned with bittersweet, and struggled through thickets of buckthorn. In some places, brambles made it impossible to pass. We were now facing a reed canary grass choked wetland, and though we could see ice over much of it, we weren't sure how much had thawed and how much water we'd encounter if the ice didn't hold us. It didn't hold. The marsh wasn't deep, but we went in over our ankles. By the time we made it across the boggy space to the vast crumbling parking lot where we'd left a car, our boots were coated in mud, our feet swimming in wet grit. It was a bonding experience. Now we each knew what the other was made of. We were not afraid of some mud, brambles, or chance encounters with people without anywhere else to be, all of which is possible to meet in spaces behind buildings, between highways, alongside stormwater entrenched creeks, because that's where both of us wanted to be. At least that's what I was thinking when I followed John across that marsh. Why I wanted to be there is the purpose of this work. Passing by empty lots, I watch plastic bags assembled flap at me and wonder what they're trying to say. I take note of the small broadleaf plantain and yellow cone-headed pineapple weed pushing up through the packed earth of a street terrace. What story are they telling? My attention on these overlooked and disconnected spaces is, for me, part of a long-term exploration of environmental narrative networks, their relationships connecting people and other beings and things on Earth, and the stories we use to describe those relationships into existence and to maintain them over time. In many such spaces, our stories are just too simple. For me, spaces like these, put to work in a city, beckon. In part, the draw is related to what Karen Barad means when she writes, "The void is not nothing, but a desiring orientation toward being, becoming, flush with yearning and innumerable imaginings of what could be, might yet have been." I'm interested in the yearning, which I feel and act on, as well as the energy expended in the politics of keeping certain spaces so policed and empty. Those politics involve an active process, an orphaning, as I've come to call it, that quite literally disappears space by keeping relationships simple. I want to catalog the forces at work and resources spent on creating and maintaining orphans, and to expose what this purposeful disciplining of space costs us. Voids, marginalia, empty spaces are created and maintained and often unquestioned. But as Barad explains, the question of absence is as political as that of presence. When has absence ever been an absolute givenness? Is it not always a question of what is seen, acknowledged, and counted as present, and for whom? The void has long been a crafty colonialist apparatus, Barad reminds us, conveniently couched in categories like uncivilized or virgin to justify appropriation. We can add vacant, infrastructure, and open to that list. Our culture normalizes land as a commodity and something anonymous and bought and sold and with infinite possible future. There is too little attention to the past and too narrow an imagination for the future. We struggle even to fully embrace the complex natural ecologies at play in most places, let alone the role of history. To maintain anonymity, we actively orphan. I came to this word orphaned after a long search for language to capture this widespread process of disconnection and disciplining of space, often in the service of infrastructure. The condition of being orphaned can refer not only to humans who've lost parents, but to animals who've lost caretakers, umbrellas who've lost owners, cars for whom manufacturers no longer make parts. And I suggest a territory that is held in isolation and stasis with diminished connectivity. Some might worry the term anthropomorphizes, and perhaps that's not, generously speaking, outside of my intent. For me, Orphaned refutes the creation of such spaces as either good or bad and insists we embrace them as products of our own activities. Orphaned spaces do important work, but with uneven and often harmful geographies. This embrace is not necessarily a parental one, but it suggests familial relations and a two-way relationship of caring with the potential for feelings of transcendence, for love. The term orphaned involves acknowledgement, responsibility, and leaning into the idea of belonging, that how we relate to orphan space matters because we belong to each other. We abandon at our peril. The multitude of orphan spaces, and it is a tremendous amount of acreage, is being routinely produced and maintained at a significant cost. Such spaces deserve focus not only because they represent a large area and financial cost to maintain, but also because of lost opportunity. There's much to be said about orphan space. The uneven geographies of species diversity and pollution reveal how spaces are orphaned along lines of race and privilege. Such space is an environmental justice frontier, an opportunity for all of us to redefine ourselves as fairly treated citizens of a heterogeneous, diverse, connected world. The land under our feet has a history, all of it. There's nothing unintentional about orphaning. Such spaces have purpose. They are managed to disappear, streamlined as a piece of our maintenance infrastructure dedicated to a single function, like street terraces and right-of-ways. Other kinds of orphans exist as the apparent accidental appropriation of space by pollution, such that it becomes single function by being toxic to many kinds of association. When the boundaries maintaining the orphan are breached, though, who ventures in and why? What new relationships emerge? For sure, nature abhors a vacuum, but a coexistence is nothing to take for granted. How do decisions get made, and who cares? This work is about the orphaning of space and also the work of people who venture into orphans. They gain access in different ways, a combination of following the rules and bending them. Connections are built and new relationships emerge from their work, which I describe as a kind of radical caring. It's work that builds on itself as empty spaces become charged with new connections and characters in a shared narrative. The emergence of a network, an assemblage of new characters and relationships that can manifest once active orphaning has halted, is a particular story, always driven by the history of the place and a collection of different agents and relationships that flow in once the seal is broken. Nothing can be taken for granted about who and what will be welcomed. Influences from near and far, from long ago and recent times must be considered and treated with care. I feel just this sentiment in Louise Erdrich's novel Night Watchman, in which she describes how her character Zana, the keeper of knowledge, navigates her world. Because everything was alive, responsive in its own way, capable of being hurt in its own way, capable of punishment in its own way, Zanat's thinking was built on treating everything that was around her with great care, Erdrich writes. John worked as a nurse, though he retired in 2019. He's also an artist, and in that way, he's like others I have followed into spaces like these, compelled by widely ranging visions and ambitions, trained to observe what others don't, and encouraged to pursue knowledge across disciplines that might help realize a vision. Artists are well equipped to question accepted uses of space, to take advantage of unexpected events or ruptures in accepted way of doing things. In many urban places, managers struggle with a convergence of aging and overwhelmed infrastructures, growing or disappearing numbers of residents, and unpredictable shocks from extreme weather or other climate change provoked events. Cracks have appeared, bridges crumble, sewers overflow, treeless streets bake and melt. Suddenly, taken for granted infrastructures like Heidegger's tools become visible as they fail. As local administrations scramble to cope, they have opened up opportunities for newcomers, including artists, to enter in once disciplined space. As I learned more about legacies of environmental art, I became more familiar with ongoing projects, though I struggled to describe the breadth of artists' ambitions. I failed frequently to describe their work as more than urban planning with good visuals. Eventually, I realized that it was not only the spaces that were overlooked and undervalued, it was the labor of connecting them, the work of caring, building relationships, of loving them. And understanding this led me to Muriel Lederman Ukele's. Ukele's work, encapsulated as maintenance art, is all about undervalued labor. In Wash Steps Maintenance, 1973, Ukele scrubbed the steps and floors of the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, Connecticut in 4-hour shifts. Visitors forced to step around her work were confronted with her kneeling figure, jeans damp, arms scrubbing. She put on display the labor of cleaning and maintenance, so critical to everyday functioning at the museum and so typically hidden away. In Touch Sanitation, 1979 to 80, she spent a year shaking hands with 8,500 city sanitation workers, saying to each one, "Thank you for keeping New York City alive." As part of this work, she was also an advocate, exhibiting the labor of maintenance and calling attention to degraded working conditions. But her interventions were not only to shine a light on the invisible worker, but to expose to us, the audience, how we relegate this work to invisibility. As she wrote in a manifesto, her work sought to engage a flushing up into consciousness, the care work required to keep us all going. As Ukele's understood, the practices of orphaning space are produced by value-laden hierarchies that denigrate landscapes of maintenance and care and allow some of us to pretend to escape the efforts behind our own social reproduction. The combined pressures of urbanization and unpredictability of climate change have created opportunities for new relationships to our structures of maintenance. I've explored orphaned spaces in Fargo, North Dakota, along the Arizona-New Mexico border, in Madison, Wisconsin, Chicago, and in New York. And my tour guides have largely been artists, working with scientists and challenging the forces that create orphans and pulling in new actors, doing the care work to build networks of new alliances and causing trouble for the institutions dedicated to maintaining business as usual. Working in orphan space, it seems to me the artists do create unique moments of transcendence and expanded awareness of existence, even as they tackle everyday on the ground problems. They work across technical and scientific boundaries and rethink cultural heritage. They investigate emotional experiences of different landscapes and expose wounds of racist, exclusionary human histories, as well as buried ecological tales. I tell the story of the School of Art Institute of Chicago sculptor and Professor Frances Whitehead's project, Slow Cleanup, which she described as just the right speed. In this work, she tackles the systemic problem of abandoned gas station lots, uninhabitable due to the histories of gasoline and other toxic spills, and especially in areas with low real estate development pressure, lacking the funds for cleanup. Working with soil physicist Paul Schwab, Whitehead reoriented research in phytoremediation, which is the use of plants to clean polluted soil, to include factors related to new human-plant relationships and environmental injustice. Soil remediation works on plant time, slowly, and often years are required to see changes in soil toxicity. It's also inexpensive once the plants are growing and at work with their root systems supporting the microbial processes that dismantle polluting hydrocarbons. There's not much to do. So profits are hard to come by, and private businesses have not invested much in phytoremediation research. And public funding too has been thin, with much of the research going to agricultural plants. Whitehead discovered that little is known about the potential of horticultural plants, that is, plants that you and I would like to have around us, for dismantling soil pollutants. Understanding that abandoned gas station sites are likely to sit as empty, fenced-off, degraded spaces for decades in lower-income sites, she worked with a neighborhood in South Chicago and students at Chicago State University to create a series of test plots aiming to discover new, cleaner upper plants that were also beautiful, colorful, good for birds and other wildlife. Laid out in radiating lines as a work of art in itself, her research garden pulled long-buried pollution into view in a grand gesture, transforming it into an asset in an underserved neighborhood. Working to put artist knowledge to practical use in a city agency, Whitehead challenges the conventional categories of urban zoning to create a palette of possibilities. Abandoned transportation infrastructure, she shows us, is part of our origin story. Its transformation offers an opportunity to reflect on automobiles, gas stations, the petroleum industry, all as cultural heritage. Telling the tale of this artwork weaves together a history of gas station economies, the unevenness of Chicago's real estate market, the travesty of leaky underground storage tanks, giant soil hydrocarbons, and new kinds of plants playing alchemist with phytoremediating microbes. Their work ended up identifying 12 garden plants with remediating potential, thus expanding the diversity of plants that all of us might work with to help us passively and inexpensively clean up after ourselves and look good doing so. In contrast to the slow-moving and homogeneous snowscape presented to us in the Coen brothers movie, Fargo, I found the city of Fargo a diverse and tumultuous place. This town, which has grown up dangerously close to a very young and unpredictable river, has experienced since its founding a number of devastating floods. As a result, residents have an uncomfortable relationship with floodwater, and tremendous amounts of human energy and concrete are dedicated to containing the Red River of the North. This includes a large number of giant stormwater containment basins, both public and private, and the private ones here are the dark blue. They're scooped out like so many random waffle holes in the very flat landscape of the prairie. But as the city has experienced increased growth and development, concerns have arisen about the unfriendly nature of these barren spaces. Artist Jackie Bruckner was brought to Fargo to help city residents practice creative agency in rethinking what might happen in these basins. Her efforts, which included creating a team of local artists and others and pursuing extensive interviews with city residents, stormwater engineers, city planners, and many others, helped expose surprising disconnections. City residents were not only uncomfortable about water, it turns out, but also about new Americans, refugees from war-torn places far away. Brought in by the long-running refugee resettlement program of Lutheran Social Services, refugees in Fargo make up some 8 to 10% of city residents. The art, which involved a years-long process of communications and workshops, including this design charrette, confronted the livability problem of stormwater basins, but at the same time required the city to face its challenges in the welcoming refugees. After years of work and a number of successful fundraising efforts, the collaboration of artists, hydrologists, planners, community activists, and others created both a number of outdoor installations, including natural play areas, community gardens, prairie walks, as well as programming, creating occasions for the diverse inhabitants of Fargo to encounter each other. The once empty windswept basin now offers a place to engage in an expanded range of sensorial experiences with land and water as active participants, to reckon with and even connect to people of different backgrounds and intentions, as well as animal and plants and other elements of a diverse environment. There are many more examples of this kind of work, and every day more take root. Often this work is ephemeral, revealing the dynamic context of this broader effort to participate in loving orphans, as well as the systemic rigidities that continue to make participation in public space and decision-making precarious. But even fleeting projects release good ideas into the world, helping us expand our vocabulary and sensory memories of what might be possible to think and feel and say as we move through our daily lives, caring for ourselves and for each other. In their capacity for expanding sensitivities to orphan space and in their fearlessness in taking on new knowledge and diverse skills, those people involved in art science collaborations such as these help chart adventurous paths in orphaned space. Their stories help us see territories to claim and to cherish as part of a whole that sustains us all. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to our conversation.